On AM 1500 KSTP St. Paul, Minneapolis, 94.5 KSTP FM St. Paul HD2, and on ScoreNorth.com. TCL is a proud sponsor of the Score North Studios. TCL, America's fastest growing TV brand. It's Purple Daily.
All right, welcome into Purple Daily. Matthew Coller along with Judd Zulgad, and we have a special show for you. People are interacting with us online already about this topic, Judd, which makes it very exciting. And from the Associated Press joining us today for this episode, a special episode of Purple Daily, is our friend from the AP, Dave Campbell. Dave, how are you?
Doing great, guys.
Are you excited for this? I haven't said yet what we're doing, but are you excited?
I'm always excited.
Okay, here's our topic. That was like a 4 out of 10 excitement, Dave. But we'll work on it as we go on.
That's I'm kind of an understated guy.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
that's true. That's why Minnesota loves you, Dave. So what we're doing today on the show, because we have OG reporters here, Judd and Dave, who have been around a little while covering the Minnesota Vikings. I wanted to ask, unless the Vikings somehow sign an offensive lineman today, which they won't, we have plenty of time to talk about other things. So I wanted to ask you guys about the craziest Minnesota Vikings seasons over the last 20 years. And partly because I am obsessed with watching games on YouTube and Football Life documentaries and things like this. And it just always comes to mind how crazy this team can be. And let me start the debate off here, Dave. With the 2016 season, that was my first year. I showed up on the day that Teddy Bridgewater's knee fell apart. The couple days later, they trade for Sam Bradford, and then we're off to the races with eyeballs, going under surgery, somebody missing, a head coach missing a game, a person hanging from a banner, a mutiny with the secondary. Let's start with 2016, and you guys can tell me, contextualized my craziest season so far. Dave, start us out here.
Well, I remember several conversations with you throughout that season, trying to sort of like say, okay, newbie, let's just take a deep breath here. You haven't seen anything yet. But I will acknowledge a couple years later, now that you're, I think, fully indoctrinated and initiated into coverage of this never dull organization, that 2016 season is on my top 5 list.
Oh, it is. Oh, it is. I've been justified by history, Dave. Thank you.
I think it's important to look at the full picture, and we really can't understate the just insaneness of oil pipeline protesters hanging from a brand new $1 billion stadium for about half of the game. I mean, that's almost enough right there to give it an honorable mention. But for sure, that to go from such a hot start, 5-0, Super Bowl talk, like impenetrable defense, to finishing 8-8, and like the Bridgewater injury, of course, a non-contact injury during a meaningless August practice, followed by Zimmer's eye troubles and Norv Turner just mysteriously and suddenly quitting, and all the quarterback shuffling, and not the least of which, Adrian Peterson's swan song with the organization. Like,
how about DJ Ski? Remember DJ Ski?
DJ Ski. Leaking news about his return to a local electronic music sort of expert. It is, yeah, you can't make it up, and I do. I think it's fair to you to sort of, include your sort of thoughts and feelings and sort of the initial craziness in the big picture that really does go down as one of the all-timers.
Well, Dave, I had come from Buffalo, where the offensive line coach once beat up a teenager over a beach chair. So I mean, it wasn't like my first go around with crazy. I had left Rex Ryan to come here. So, but it even took it that year to a different level because it just never stopped. I think Teddy Bridgewater's non-contact knee collapse.
Oh, son. Oh, you still are a simpleton, aren't you? 2016 didn't stop, but 2000. I started to cover this team in 2005, and I can give you the 4 years. It's not 5. I can give you the 4 years. And Dave, see if you agree with this assessment. Number 4 on my list would actually be the craziness of 2009, because despite the fact that was a good year, that's still the year that Favre came back, guy dressed up in a chicken suit when he arrived. Number 3 on my list is 2016, which was crazy. But number 2 on the list to me is 2005, because the Love Boat and that fiasco took off, and you couldn't, if you were to do a script, you would more likely say there are people who are going to hang from the rafters than there are players on a bye week who are going to go on a sex cruise on Lake Minnetonka in a boat. And by the way, the help on that boat is going to be high school kids who are going to see Bryant McKinney do things that these kids would have to buy porn to see. And then number 1, of course, is 2010. 2005, the Love Boat takes a special place in sports history that you would have been hard pressed to ever say, I wonder if this could happen during the course. It was something like Hollywood would have made up for a TV show more so than a real life event.
That's a great point. I think Judd and I, having discussed this topic many times over the last decade, and probably anyone else who's followed the team or covered the team, it's tough to disagree on the 2010-2005 gold, silver sort of medals. Those seasons will have a permanent place on the podium, like no matter how many years the Vikings are in business.
Well, let me say this about 2016, though, Dave, and let me just continue to try and strengthen my case. Although I'm not arguing that Love Boat and a roof collapsing are number 1 and 2, that 2016 was different because it had like volume. It was sort of like Kirk Cousins putting up 4,000 yards. It had volume stats. It didn't have one thing that was crazier than a roof collapsing or a sex boat, but it had 15 things over the length of the season.
2010 did too.
Yeah, well, here's where Judd has to say, "Okay, son," again, because he's in the studio next year. A little pat on the shoulder. See, 2005 and 2010 had plenty of volume too. Let's not forget 2005. Granted, this is the off season leading up to 2005, but the head coach is fined $100,000 for scalping his Super Bowl tickets. How many times does that happen in NFL history? Or at least has someone been punished for that?
Ontario Smith too, Dave, right?
Ontario Smith too, right? That same off season.
The Wizinator. Yes, all-timer.
Again, you could maybe split hairs about whether those events belong in the 2004 or 2005 seasons, but it's a calendar year 2005. I think that's a pretty fair way to categorize it. Let's also not forget this is the year the Wilfs purchased the team from Red McCombs after an agreement in principle with a businessman named Reggie Fowler is totally shuttled because it turns out he's inflated his net worth and doesn't have enough money to buy the team. That incidentally happened on Valentine's Day. That press conference to introduce Reggie Fowler as the next owner of the team happened on Valentine's Day.
And Reggie was what, Dave? He was 6'1" and tons of fun.
He said that. Yeah, he was one of the most. It was one of the most nervous, press conferences I've ever seen. As far as the principal figure in the press conference, just like sweating through the whole thing. Really nice guy. Actually, ended up being a minority owner in the Wolves group, so he, maintained some presence with the team. But there was some resume inaccuracies that had come to light sort of through this process in the off season. And anyway, yeah. So a shuttled or sort of shuffled sale of the team is another thing we can't forget about 2005. They also started the code of conduct, which was in specific response to the Love Boat. So yeah, I guess it's not fair to necessarily single this out as a separate incident, but the Wilfs handed out binders, or at least someone in the organization, to all of the players.
It was the Wilfs. You're right.
Yeah, several weeks after the Love Boat incident, and sort of, I remember the judge is probably in there too, just sort of circulating in the locker room on a Thursday or Friday, and players with these sort of strange looks at this, kind of rolling their eyes at this.
They tossed them in their lockers,
like ninth grade,
yes,
syllabus for ninth grade biology or something.
Yes.
We could of course continue to go on, but let's also not forget, on the final day of the 2005 regular season, the head coach was fired via press release in the locker room when his son, one of the ball boys, happened to be handed a press release with all the rest of the assembled media.
Yep.
So that's how he learned that his dad was losing his job. So anyway, there's plenty of volume in 2005, and then of course Judd could fill in the rest of the volume incidents in 2010. It goes much beyond a stadium collapse and Brett Favre shenanigans.
And Dave, don't forget too, the Love Boat also resulted in various news outlets, including, I believe, one that resides downstairs from me right now, going to Bryant McKinney's home area and digging through the garbage and dumpster diving to try and find anything that they possibly could. And then that also was the famous presser, because they kept poor Mike Tice was put on the hook for all this, right? So instead of like sending out a lawyer to be like, okay, I'll field the questions about the Love Boat because the coach doesn't know, Mike Tice kept. So if I'm not mistaken, Channel 9 had a reporter show up and say, is it true or not that the proceeds from the fines were used for the Love Boat? And Tice said, no, it's not true.
That absolutely happened.
And Channel 9's headline that night was proceeds from fines not used for a Love Boat, as if it was accepted that might have been the case. Yeah. So this was a continuing extension saga that went on for how long, Dave? A month and a half?
Yeah, I'd say that's about right. Also, don't forget, Teddy Bridgewater's injury in 2016 was a bad deal, but Dante Culpepper shredded all of his knee ligaments in 2005 as well. Now, granted, it wasn't a non-contact practice injury. It happened, on a Sunday afternoon in, I believe, at Carolina, but
when Steve Smith rode the boat.
Sort of huge, sort of shift in the tone and sort of pace of the season. They ended up giving the job back to Brad Johnson after that for his second turn with the team.
Dave Campbell from the Associated Press joining us here. It is Purple Daily with Matthew Coller, Judd Zulgad. We are talking about the craziest Viking seasons of the last 20 years. Now, I want some side nominations here, and I'll give you some that Twitter has chimed in with. 2003 being eliminated by, of all people, Josh McCown, still playing football, Josh McCown, and Nate Poole in the back of the end zone after starting that season 6-0. And some nominations for this season because of Tony Sperano, the John DeFilippo firing, paying $84 million for a quarterback who wasn't good, so forth and so on. I don't know if it really could make the list. I don't think there's enough there, but a coach passing away the day before training camp, plus Everson Griffin in his absence as well. I don't know if it had volume or the completely crazy, never see it before, never see it again thing. But in terms of a number 3, number 4, 5, 6 pick down the list, maybe 2018 is somewhere in there.
Yeah. I think you hit on all the points. If we were to say it was a crazy season, we'd probably be guilty of recency bias. But it's a very solid honorable mention on the list, I think.
I agree.
You're dealing. I mean, this is all in context. You could probably pick out for the Green Bay Packers, let's say, one of the most stable franchises and successful of the last 20 years. That would probably rank as an all-timer, pretty close to it. But for the Vikings, just with all the craziness that's going on in the last 20 years, it doesn't quite crack the list, but it does check some of the boxes, I think, as you mentioned.
I think
I'm glad Twitter brought up 2003 because that was going to be my dark horse sort of selection for the top 5 as sort of my fifth in the power rankings. It's easy to forget about because it's so long ago now, but obviously the way the final game ended, it just simply couldn't make up. Let's also not forget that not only did they start 6-0, but that loss to Arizona was one of 4 losses that season to teams that finished 4-12. It wouldn't even be possible probably to have 4 teams on your schedule that finished 4-12, let alone lose to all of them and still be a winning team. It's almost just the statistical improbability of that.
And Dave, don't forget too that I was in Green Bay that year, but the Packers bye week that year fell on the Sunday of the first Vikings loss, which I believe was to the Giants at the Metrodome, and that's right. And that's the game. So they're like 6-1, right? And that's the game where Red McCombs decides to go down to the locker room and undress the team about how embarrassed he is by that defeat. And I remember picking up the story the next day and reading it, and I'm like, my God, they're 6-1, and the owner just went to the locker room and basically told the players that you're a bunch of blankety blanks because you lost one game. That is a special type of situation.
It sure was. That was sort of the backdrop, I think, for that is these efforts at the legislature to get funding for a new stadium are going on, and the sort of futility of McCombs' quest is increasing. And obviously, as alluded to just a few minutes ago, he only owned the team for a couple more years after that. Just decided it was time to sell off. So, it sort of went deeper than just a loss at home to the Giants. There's a lot going on that season in the background as well.
Where do some of the Randy Moss events fall into this? I mean, you have straight cash homie, you've got the parking attendant, you've got his trade away from Minnesota, you've got his trade back to Minnesota. I feel
when
like
he walked off the field in Washington. I think that was 2004, right, Judd?
And even a despicable mooning act as well that Minnesota fans have not forgiven Joe Buck for the call on that one. I feel like his presence alone amplifies many of these seasons where it wasn't ever the craziest thing that was going on, but there was always something going on with him.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And certainly 2003, I think statistically was one of his 2 best ever with the Vikings. And while there wasn't one of the hallmark, Moss headline moments that season, again, he was still there. I think if I remember correctly, there was a late season loss at Chicago that year in which they lost by maybe 3 points, and sort of a contested throw to the end zone was sort of in and out of Moss's hands and wrestled away by Charles Tillman.
Yep. Peanut.
Who probably was a rookie at that point. And, there's some of these effort questions that on Moss's part that came up kind of after that key loss, which obviously in retrospect would have put them in the playoffs and would have prevented them from having to win that game at Arizona 2 weeks later. All the Moss stuff is sort of almost like rhythmically sprinkled over his whole, 7-year tenure with the Vikings. So it's like the Moss boost, like you said, Coller, but none of the seasons rise, I think, to the top simply because of something he did or didn't do.
But the Moss, Dave, the one that was the distraction and all hell was already breaking loose before he got here. Moss 2010, the 1 month, right?
Right.
Because that whole thing was predicated on the fact that Sidney Rice hadn't had surgery when he should have. Favre came back and was not made aware of the fact that Rice was going to be out for basically the entire year. The Vikings had a deal with the Chargers for Vincent Jackson to make a trade until the Chargers GM at the time decided, bleep him, I'm going to basically squat on his rights. And so the Vikings, in a panic, Spielman went to Chile and said, Brad. And Brad said, yeah. Said, can you handle Randy Moss? And of course, Brad said, of course I can. And Moss got here. And if you recall the introductory Moss press conference with Wilf in the back of the room, his last words were, y'all lucky I wasn't here for that boat because you would have seen something. And I looked in the back of that press conference and Ziggy's laughing. And I thought, dude, you have no idea what you signed up for. What we didn't know is Moss was washed up. And so you basically got a month of him souring Percy. And he and Favre, my understanding was, in the offensive meeting room in that 1 month of 2010, he and Favre would sit in front of that room and mock the game plan, basically, because they thought it was so bad. And they're like, we know what we're doing. And by the time that month was done, Randy Moss had basically dropped a bomb in that room, and they could not get rid of him quick enough. And that's the one where Childress released him after the Patriots game. And I'll never forget, guys, Bob Sansevier in the press conference at Winter Park that Monday said, "Are you letting Moss go?" And Chili's like, "No, absolutely not." And we got back to the press room, and NFL Network was reporting that he had been let go. So we all ran back for locker room access. And the only guy there, Ben Lieber, the poor guy, is the only guy there. And it's because he's a PA rep, so he's distributing Players Association stuff. And we're like, "Ben, did you guys just let Moss go?" And he's like, "Yeah." Turns out poor Ben went up to Childress' office and got his butt chewed because Childress was so upset that Ben had come clean to us. That's how you knew that year was going to be off the track.
Now, see, Judd, I have to, because you brought it up in the whole Moss thing, I have to play this. It's only fitting.
At the same time, I do ask questions. Answer questions throughout the week. Before the league to find me $25,000, I'm not going to answer any more questions for the rest of this year. If it's going to be an interview, I'm going to conduct it. So I'll answer my own questions, ask myself the questions, then give y'all the answers. So
that was the Patriots game.
Dave, before we let you go here,
that's great, by the way.
Is Moss number one on your list for a personality that has been a part of the most crazy things, or just the person that was most connected to weird happenings? Because I think that Mike Zimmer has put his name up there for just being connected in some way, not his fault always, to weird different things, starting with he gets here, takes the job, and Adrian Peterson is almost immediately suspended.
Yeah, it's hard. It'd be hard to knock him off the podium, like, to use the Olympic analogy, right? Peterson, Zimmer, Childress, those guys, are in the competition for that. Even thinking about Moss, and we joke around and sort of about these old stories and sort of kind of play these mythical rankings, but on more somber notes, like there are like really tragic things that happen that contribute to some of this craziness. The 2001 season, I definitely can't forget, as far as how wild that was, with a player actually dying in training camp. And in my mind, Moss is very strongly connected to that. He was really good friends with Corey Stringer, and just the first time the Vikings publicly talked about it, maybe it might have been the day after, or maybe the day of, but there was a press conference at Minnesota State University, which I guess was still Mankato State back then. And Moss just gave this impassioned sort of story about how much he appreciated Corey Stringer, and basically broke down and cried at the podium in front of hundreds of people. So yeah, for better, worse, tragic, hilarious, Randy Moss, for sure, these last 20 years is very strongly tied to all these memorable moments of Vikings history.
What's amazing, guys, about covering a team on a daily basis, how many people you see cry. It's incredible. Just over in the last 3 years since I've been here, we've probably seen tears at a podium or locker or whatever, a dozen times over the last 3 years.
Maybe it's time for you, Matthew, to start getting more in touch with your feelings.
I know I'm not a crier. We've had this conversation before.
Crying is great. Good for the soul.
It doesn't happen. The waterworks don't come. I don't know.
Well,
hey, Dave,
but you're right. There's a lot of that. Yeah.
The one receiver you didn't bring up beyond Percy, Corin Robinson.
Yes.
All right. So I kid you guys not. At the end of 2005, if I am not mistaken, Corin comes here and he's had problems and signed here, and he returns kickoffs and he's fantastic. And if I'm not mistaken,
makes the Pro Bowl.
We award him the good guy award, I believe. He comes He comes in our press room and he sits down with us and he's relaxed as can be, talking about how he's changed his life, how everything's different for him. And I mean, I would have given you, as dumb as I was at that time, $1,000 and said, this guy has turned it around. He's found himself. This is fantastic. Not how many months later, we're in Mankato.
Yeah.
And Corin's going through town at 100 miles an hour trying to get up that damn hill to get back to the dorm with 10 cops behind him. The next time we see Corin is in the jail in St. Peter in the courthouse, shackled. That's when I knew I'm never going to believe an athlete again for as long as I live. I'm never buying the story ever again. Oh, and then too, the sad one as well, to Dave's point, you had the guy I've always considered to be one of the best guys I've ever covered play for the Packers and Vikings in Darren Sharper, who ended up being a serial rapist. Darren Sharper was the most media-friendly, nicest guy you could come across. He was as helpful as you could possibly be and ended up to be probably one of the worst human beings to ever go through the Vikings.
That's a great point. He also, incidentally, is one of the players I remember sort of rolling his eyes hard at the code of conduct that was handed out in 2005. Maybe he should have paid a little bit closer attention.
You know who's
we know why, yeah.
a low-key personality that is just always sort of connected to crazy Vikings drama is Mike Prefer. Like, now that he has gone to Cleveland, you have the incident with Chris Kluwe and then the kicking nonsense that has gone on. And Dave, I don't know if you were there for this year, but his attempt at an explanation for why Blair Walsh fell off the table because Blair wanted to be in better shape and lost weight despite Prefer allegedly telling him not to, it goes up there as far as putting him in the honorable mention category of how do crazy things always happen around you?
That was great stuff that day. And I only regret I didn't have any really room to use it. I just couldn't find a way to make it relevant to my coverage, but that was quite an anecdote.
Oh, I wrote it.
Well, of course, yeah. Some of us have a lot on our plate.
You don't have scorenorth.com to blog whenever you feel like you want to.
Tweet it, Campbell. Tweet it next time.
That's what Twitter's for, Dave.
Get it out there.
Dave, this was a lot of fun. I hope we can do it again on other historical things that we go back and look at craziness and randomness. So,
Judd's
thanks.
A great mind to have in the mix.
Yeah.
A lot of different perspectives.
Yes.
We all work it out.
Certainly. Well, thanks, Dave, for dropping by. People can read your stuff at, I don't know, is there an Associated Press website? Is it called Associated Press?
We're at apnews.com.
You guys are online?
And then you can, the AP News mobile app, which is really, really handy.
Are you guys on Twitch? Phil said there's something called Twitch.
I couldn't tell you one thing about
it. God bless you, Dave Campbell. That's why I like you.
Thanks for doing this, Dave.
See ya.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Bye.